The vast, obsidian dome of the High Synod hummed with a frequency that vibrated in the marrow of every delegate present, a low, resonant thrum that had underscored the governance of the galaxy for 10,000 cycles. Yet today, that ancient vibration felt less like the heartbeat of civilization and more like the rattling breath of a dying god. In the center of the amphitheater, suspended in a gravimetric field that shimmered with the iridescence of trapped starlight, the holographic projection of the rim territories burned with a sickly, bruised violet light, a contamination spreading across the star charts like gangrene through healthy flesh. High Counselor Vikor of the Elari smoothed the silken folds of his ceremonial robes, his 4 tactile digits trembling slightly as they rested upon the cool surface of the podium, his compound eyes fracturing the terrified faces of the 300 representatives into 1,000 facets of despair. The silence in the hall was not the respectful quiet of contemplation that usually graced these chambers. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of terror, thick enough to choke on, broken only by the erratic clicking of mandibles and the soft, fluid rustle of gills gasping in the pressurized air. They were the masters of the known universe, the architects of the hyperlanes, the sculptors of nebulas, yet they stood paralyzed before a threat that defied the very physics they had spent eons mastering. The entity, if such a monstrous amalgamation of void energy and corrupted biological matter could be reduced to a singular noun, had no name in the civilized tongues of the Galactic Concordat, for to name it was to acknowledge a fear so primal it threatened to unravel the social conditioning of the high races. But in the hushed, superstitious whispers of the outer colonies, it was known as the Tenebris, the shadow that eats. A rare and impossible monster that had emerged from the dark space between galaxies where no life should exist. Vikor watched the projection as a red icon, representing the 7th Orbital Defense Fleet of the Hegemony, flickered and vanished from the display, the silence of its deletion screaming louder than any distress beacon. The were a warrior caste, their ships shielded by layers of folded dimensional plating, their plasma lances capable of boiling oceans, yet they had been extinguished in seconds, swatted aside like gnats before a gale. The Tenebris did not merely destroy, it unmade. It absorbed the energy of weapons fire, fed upon the shields of starships, and swallowed the psychic screams of the dying to fuel its inexorable advance toward the core worlds. A low murmur rippled through the assembly, a tide of anxious vocalizations that rose in volume until Delegate Thrax of the crystalline silica ascendancy stood, his faceted body refracting the dim ambient light into sharp, angry spectrums. He spoke not with a mouth, but through a resonance that vibrated the air directly, a sound like grinding glass. He demanded to know why the ancient protocols had failed, why the containment fields of the precursors had not activated, and why the Synod wasted time in debate while sector after sector fell to the devouring void. His anger was a mask for terror, a fragile facade that crumbled as the holographic map updated again, showing the Tenebris entity bypassing the gravity wells of the border stars and accelerating, defying all known laws of inertia, toward the Elari home system. The monster was not mindlessly feeding anymore, it was hunting. It had tasted the psionic signature of the Council, the greatest concentration of sentient thought in the galaxy, and it was coming to feast on the minds of the leaders. In the shadows of the uppermost tier, far removed from the golden light of the central podium, sat the observers from the younger races, those civilizations deemed too primitive or too volatile for full membership in the Synod, allowed only to watch and learn from their betters. Among them, sitting in a chair that looked too small for his bipedal frame, was Ambassador Elias Thorne of the Terran Republic. He sat with a stillness that unnerved the fluid, shifting aliens around him, his biological composition appearing soft, fleshy, and tragically unarmored to the eyes of the Synod. The humans were a curiosity, a species that had barely mastered faster-than-light travel before stumbling into the wider galactic community, a race of short-lived, kinetic-obsessed contradictions who built ships that looked like floating refineries and spoke in languages devoid of tonal nuance. They were tolerated, patronized, and largely ignored, viewed as children playing with fire in a universe of ice. Vikor had not even thought to inform the humans of the full extent of the crisis, assuming their primitive projectile weapons and nuclear firecrackers would be as effective as throwing stones at a supernova. The debate on the floor descended into chaos, the panicked cry. Ease of the delegates merging into a cacophony of fear as the High Counselor struggled to maintain order. The Valeri proposed abandoning the rim entirely to buy time. The remnant demanded a suicidal charge of all available fleets. The aquatic Hydrai suggested attempting to communicate with the monster, to offer it a tribute of uninhabited worlds in exchange for mercy. It was a display of pathetic desperation, the crumbling of a golden age revealed to be hollow at its core. It was then that the human ambassador stood. He did not project his voice with psionic amplification, nor did he emit a resonance frequency. He simply tapped a command into the archaic wrist unit he wore, and a sharp, piercing electronic tone cut through the noise of the chamber, silencing the delegates more effectively than any gavel. Thorn walked to the edge of his observation balcony, his hands clasped behind his back, his face a mask of calm amidst the storm of alien hysteria. "High Counselor," Thorn's voice was amplified by the chamber's automated translation matrix, sounding flat and mechanical compared to the melodic tongues of the elder races. "The Terran Republic has monitored the telemetry of the entity you call the Tenebris. We have analyzed the debris patterns of the fleet. We have calculated the trajectory." He paused, his eyes scanning the vast assembly, meeting the gaze of beings who had ruled the stars while humanity was still banging rocks together. "You are attempting to fight a biological singularity with energy weapons. You are feeding it. Every plasma bolt, every laser lance, every particle beam you fire is merely adding mass to its core. You cannot burn fire." A ripple of indignation went through the hall. A sub-minister of the Valeri floated upward, his tendrils flushing a deep, angry crimson. "And what would a Terran know of high-energy physics? Your species still propels slugs of metal through vacuum using chemical explosions. You are barely out of the industrial age. Do not presume to lecture the architects of the Synod on the nature of warfare. We fight with the light of stars. You fight with the dirt of the ground." The arrogance was palpable, a defense mechanism against the encroaching dark, but Thorn did not flinch. He merely nodded, a gesture of strange, grim acceptance. "Precisely," Thorn said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming colder, harder. "You fight with light, we fight with dirt, and sometimes, High Counselor, the only thing that stops a monster is a rock thrown hard enough to shatter its skull." The dismissal from the Synod was immediate and scathing. They turned their backs on the human, returning to their futile planning, their intricate and elegant strategies that relied on technologies the monster had already proven immune to. Thorn sat back down, his expression unreadable, but his fingers moved with a blur of speed across his console, sending a heavily encrypted burst transmission out of the dome, through the interference of the nebula, and into the dark void beyond the Synod's sensor net. The message was short, consisting of a single set of coordinates and an authentication code that unlocked the safeties on weapon systems the galaxy had never seen, systems that had been banned by the Treaty of Light, a treaty humanity had signed, but in their paranoid pragmatism had never fully adhered to in the shadows of their own shipyards. The humans waited. They did not flee. They did not panic. They watched the red tide of the Tenebris entity draw closer, the inevitable counting down like the ticking of a doomsday clock. Hours turned into a single agonizing cycle. The sensor alarms of the High Synod blared, a sound of absolute doom. The Tenebris had arrived. It did not drop out of hyperspace. It tore its way through, rupturing the fabric of reality at the edge of the system. The view screens were filled with the sight of it, a sprawling, shifting mass of vantablack tendrils and pulsating violet coercers, a horror the size of a small moon that defied biological classification. It was surrounded by a cloud of debris, the shattered hulks of the defense fleets it had consumed along the way. The psychological pressure in the chamber was instant. Weaker minds snapped, delegates collapsing in seizures as the psychic scream of the monster washed over the station. The station's shields flared, a golden bubble of energy that the monster struck not with weapons, but with its very body pressing against the barrier, draining it, tasting it. The lights in the chamber flickered and died, replaced by the red emergency strobes, casting the terrified aliens in a bloody, rhythmic glare. "Shield integrity at 20%. Cried the tactical officer, a Hydrai whose aquatic suit was bubbling with stress. "It is eating the 0-point energy. We are powering it up. Drop shields, drop shields." But it was too late. The entity lashed out with a tendril of pure void energy, shattering the primary generator. The synth. Asian groaned, the gravity plating failing, sending delegates drifting into the air, screaming in a dozen languages. Vikor clung to his podium, watching the death of his civilization approach through the transparent dome. The monster was opening its maw, a swirling vortex of nothingness that promised not just death, but erasure. The elder races closed their eyes, praying to gods that had long since gone silent. And then the universe shuddered. It was not the elegant, sliding transition of a warp drive, nor the folding of space used by the Valari. It was a violent, tearing impact, as if a hammer had struck the surface of a frozen lake. Space distorted, twisted, and shattered directly between the defenseless station and the advancing monster. From the jagged wounds in reality, shapes emerged. They were not the sleek teardrop vessels of the Elari, nor the geometric perfection of the Silica. They were ugly. They were brutal, blocky monstrosities of gray hull plating, scarred and pitted, bristling with antennas and heatsinks that glowed with a dull, angry orange. They possessed no elegance, no art. They looked like flying skyscrapers, like industrial compactors given engines. There were 5 of them, massive dreadnoughts of the Terran Republic, their prows painted with white hazard stripes and the names of ancient, violent war gods: Ares, Sekhmet, Tyr, Kali, Mars. The aliens in the chamber floated in stunned silence, their impending death paused by the sheer audacity of the arrival. "Human ships," Vikor whispered, his mind unable to comprehend the scale of the vessels. They were massive, far larger than the frigate-class diplomatic couriers the humans usually paraded. These were mountains of metal, built for a war the galaxy had forgotten how to fight. The tenebrous entity paused, its tendrils recoiling slightly, sensing a new vibration in the vacuum. Not the hum of energy shields, but the deep, mechanical throb of massive magnetic coils charging up. The monster, confused by the lack of energy to drain, lashed out tentatively with a psychic probe. But the human ships were silent, their crews shielded by layers of lead and thought-dampening alloys. Aboard the lead ship, the UNS Kali Admiral Harper stood on a bridge that looked more like a submarine's control room than a starship's command center. Cables hung from the ceiling, sparks rained from overloaded capacitors, and the air smelled of recycled coffee and gun oil. "Target lock established, Admiral," the weapons officer reported, his voice calm, devoid of the panic that had gripped the High Synod. "The entity is biological energy hybrid. Shields are useless. Energy weapons are useless." Harper nodded, lighting a cigar, an archaic habit for an archaic warrior. "Good thing we didn't bring any batteries," he growled. "Spin up the max, load the tungsten carbide penetrators, calculate firing solution for the central mass. We aren't here to burn it, we're here to smash it." The dangerous ships of the humans did not power up lasers. Instead, the entire spinal structure of the 5 dreadnoughts began to glow with a sickly blue light as the magnetic accelerator cannons, weapons forbidden by the Galactic Concordat for their sheer brutality, reached critical charge. These were not weapons of war in the civilized sense. They were engines of physics, designed to accelerate a slug of solid metal the size of a shuttlecraft to a significant percentage of the speed of light. The kinetic energy contained in a single round was enough to crack a planet's crust. The aliens watched in horror and confusion as the human ships maneuvered with thrusters that belched chemical fire, lining up in a firing phalanx. "Fire," Harper ordered. There was no sound in the vacuum, but the impact was felt in the teeth of every being on the station. The 5 slugs exited the barrels of the human ships at relativistic speeds, trailing streaks of superheated plasma. They crossed the distance to the tenebrous entity in a fraction of a second. The monster, accustomed to absorbing energy beams and dispersing them, had no defense against a solid object moving at 0.4 C. The first slug struck the center of the void mass. It did not absorb the shot. The slug punched through the semi-corporeal flesh, the kinetic energy transferring instantly upon impact. The result was not an explosion, but a cataclysm. The shockwave liquefied the entity's internal structure. The second and third slugs hit microseconds later, tearing massive gaping wounds in the monster's form, blowing chunks of void flesh thousands of kilometers into space. The monster screamed, a psychic shriek of agony that shattered the viewports of the station's lower decks. But the humans were not done. "Reload, switch to canister shot," Harper commanded. The ships vented massive plumes of steam into space as they cooled their rails, the mechanical loaders slamming new rounds into the britches with the sound of tectonic plates shifting. The second volley was different. These rounds detonated just before impact, releasing thousands of smaller tungsten flechettes, a shotgun blast of metal rain that shredded the entity's remaining tendrils, turning the terrifying predator into a cloud of disassociated gore. The tenebrous entity, the god-killer, the eater of stars, writhed in the vacuum, its form destabilizing, its cohesion failing under the sheer, brutal application of Newtonian physics. It tried to retreat, to fold space and flee, but the UNS Kali launched a spread of gravity anchors, missiles that created localized gravity wells, pinning the monster in place. Finish it, Harper said softly. The final volley was a single round from the collie, a hyperdense rod of depleted uranium. It struck the core of the entity, the beating heart of the void beast. The impact was blinding, a flash of kinetic transfer that outshone the local star. When the light faded, the monster was gone. All that remained was a dissipating cloud of purple mist and the cooling debris of a nightmare that had made the galaxy tremble. The human ships vented their heat sinks again, the orange glow fading to a dull red, and held their position, silent, ugly, and undeniably victorious. In the High Synod, the silence was absolute. Vikor stared at the human ships, his mind reeling. He had spent his life believing that civilization was defined by the elegance of its technology, by the move away from kinetic violence, by the ascent into pure energy. He looked at Ambassador Thorne, who was still standing at the balcony, calmly checking his wrist unit, as if he had just ordered a meal rather than orchestrated the execution of a cosmic horror. The realization hit Vikor with the force of the human railguns. The galaxy had been protected not by the enlightened, but by the savage. The humans had not evolved past violence, they had perfected it. They had kept the old ways, the dirty ways, the dangerous ways, specifically for moments like this. They were the monsters that the other monsters feared. Thorne turned to the assembly, his face weary. "The threat is neutralized, High Counselor," he said, his voice echoing in the stunned chamber. "We will deploy salvage teams to ensure no regenerative tissue remains. We also suggest you update your threat assessment protocols. The universe is a dark forest, and sometimes carrying a torch isn't enough. You need a hammer." He turned to leave, but Vikor spoke, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and newfound respect. "Ambassador, what are those ships? We have never seen their like in your registered fleet manifest." Thorne paused at the door, a shadow crossing his face. "Those are the Ark Guardians, Counselor. We built them 300 years ago when we first looked out at the stars and realized how quiet it was. We figured something was eating the noise. We built them not to conquer, but to ensure that when the dark things came, humanity would be the one doing the striking." He looked back at the holographic projection of the drifting human dreadnoughts. "You called us young. You called us primitive. But while you were building art, we were sharpening sticks. We are the designated survivors of this galaxy, and you are welcome." The shift in the chamber was palpable. The fear of the monster had been replaced by a different kind of fear, a wariness of the small, soft beings who walked among them. The humans were no longer the comedic upstarts of the council. They were the sleeping giants, the keepers of the dangerous ships. Vikor realized that the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. The Elari, the Valeri, the they were the gardeners of the galaxy. But the humans were the wolves that guarded the garden, and they had just shown their teeth. As the weeks passed, the diplomatic landscape of the galaxy transformed. The Terran Republic was granted a permanent seat on the High Synod, not out of charity, but out of necessity. The alien fleets began to refit, abandoning some of their delicate energy aesthetic for the redundant durability of human armor. But the true turning point came during the post-battle analysis. The human salvage teams, working alongside Elari scientists, recovered a fragment of the tenebrous entity's core. It was not merely a biological organ, it was a biomechanical transmitter. The monster had not been a wandering predator, it had been a scout, a probe, and in its final moments before the kinetic slug obliterated it, it had sent a signal. The revelation took place in a secure briefing room aboard the UNS Kali, where High Counselor Vikor stood alongside Admiral Harper and Ambassador Thorne. The mood was grim. The holographic display showed the decoded signal, a complex mathematical sequence that pointed toward the great void beyond the galactic rim. "It called out," Harper said, his voice gravelly. "It screamed for help, or maybe it just marked the target." Vikor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's air conditioning. "There are more of them?" he asked. "Billions," Thorne answered, zooming the map out until the galaxy was a small spiral in the dark. "We found records in the creature's genetic memory. It belongs to a swarm that has consumed 3 neighboring galaxies. They are the Great Filter. They are the reason we don't hear radio signals from the Andromeda sector." The scale of the threat was paralyzing. The tenebrous entity had been a single cell of a cancer that spanned the cosmos. The Elari counselor slumped in his chair. "Then it is hopeless," he whispered. "We struggled to kill one, how can we fight a swarm?" Admiral Harper leaned forward, the harsh light of the tactical table illuminating the scars on his face. "We didn't struggle, Counselor, you struggled. We killed it in 3 volleys." He pointed to the schematic of a new class of ship, one that dwarfed even the Kali. "The Kali and her sisters are old tech. We kept them in mothballs because we didn't want to scare you. But now the gloves come off." The image rotated, showing a vessel that was essentially a massive spinal gun built around a captured singularity, a weapon capable of firing black holes. "We humans have a saying," Harper continued. "There is always a bigger fish. The swarm thinks it's the predator. They think this galaxy is a buffet." Thorne placed a hand on the table, looking at the alien leader with a terrifying intensity. "We are going to mobilize the entire Terran industrial complex. We are going to share our kinetic technology with your fleets. We are going to turn every asteroid in the belt into a bullet and every moon into a fortress. We are going to build a wall of fire and iron around this galaxy that will make the void itself bleed." Vikor looked at the humans, these short, fragile beings who spoke of galaxy-spanning war with the calm calculation of an accountant. He realized then that the universe had made a mistake. It had created a predator species, trapped it on a high-gravity death world, forced it to survive ice ages and plagues and its own self-destructive nature, and then released it into the stars. The swarm was coming, yes, but they were coming to a galaxy that was now under the protection of the Terran Republic. "The swarm is hungry," Vikor said, finding a strange, cold courage in the presence of the humans. "Let them come," Harper said, zooming the map in on Earth, a tiny blue dot that cast a very long shadow. "We'll feed them lead." The alliance that followed was not one of easy friendship, but of forged steel. The Ilari provided the engines, the humans provided the guns. The Valeri provided the sensors, the humans provided the strategy. The galaxy transformed from a collection of squabbling city-states into a fortress. The atmosphere in the High Synod was no longer one of fear, but of grim purpose. The philosophical debates about the morality of violence were silenced, replaced by the roar of forges and the drilling of marines. Years later, when the true swarm arrived, darkening the stars of the outer rim like a plague of locusts, they did not find a terrified, divided prey. They found the horizon line. They found a combined fleet of 1,000,000 ships, a mixture of alien grace and human brutality. And leading them was the UNS Terra, a ship so large it had its own weather system, its main cannon pointed directly at the heart of the swarm. The battle that ensued was not recorded in history books as a tragedy, but as a massacre. The swarm, which had consumed galaxies, broke against the kinetic wall of the human-alien alliance. They could not adapt to the sheer volume of physical matter being hurled at them. They could not absorb the fury of a species that had spent its entire existence fighting to survive. In the aftermath, as the broken remnants of the swarm retreated into the dark, High Counselor Vikor stood once again in the High Synod. The chamber was repaired, the lights were bright, but the atmosphere had changed forever. He looked at the human delegation, now occupying the place of honor. He realized that the rare monster the galaxy had feared was never the Tenebris. It was never the swarm. The rarest monster in the universe was a creature that could hold a weapon capable of killing a god, and choose to use it to save a stranger. The humans were the monsters, and they were their monsters. The final twist, however, came not from the void, but from the humans themselves. During the victory celebrations, Admiral Harper requested a private audience with Vikor. The old soldier looked tired, his age showing more than ever. "There is something you need to know, Vikor," Harper said, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. "The technology we used, the kinetic drivers, the gravity anchors, we didn't invent them." Vikor froze. "I do not understand. You said you built the Ark Guardians." "We built them," Harper admitted. "But we built them from blueprints we found buried on Mars. We aren't the first ones to fight the swarm, Counselor. We are the descendants of the ones who lost." He slid a datapad across the table. It showed genetic markers, ancient DNA comparisons. The humans were not native to Earth. They were the refugees of a galaxy long since consumed, a warrior caste genetically engineered by a dead civilization to be the ultimate weapon, seeded on a harsh world to breed and harden, to prepare for the return of the enemy. "We are not just inhabitants of this galaxy," Harper said softly. "We are a biological contingency plan, a weapon left behind by ghosts." Vikor looked at the data, the realization washing over him. The aggression, the resilience, the instinctive grasp of war. It was all designed. "Does your people know?" Vikor asked. "No," Harper shook his head. "And they never will. If they knew they were weapons, they might stop trying to be people. And that's the only thing that keeps us from becoming like the swarm." Vikor raised his glass, looking at the human with a mixture of horror and profound gratitude. "To the monsters," he said quietly. Harper clinked his glass against the aliens. "To the monsters who fight for the light." And outside, the stars burned a little brighter, safe in the shadow of the dangerous ships. The galaxy spun on, no longer trembling, for it had found its teeth, and they were made of tungsten, courage, and the ancient, unbreakable will of humanity. The peace that followed was known as the Pax Terrana, a golden age forged in iron. The cultural exchange was immense. Alien philosophy softened the hard edges of human pragmatism, while human resilience steeled the resolve of the gentler races. Yet underneath the trade agreements and the cultural festivals, the watchtowers remained. The massive shipyards of the Terran Republic never stopped working. They built bigger ships, stranger weapons, diving deeper into the forbidden physics of the universe. Because the humans knew, in their genetic memory, that the swarm was just one predator in a deep ocean, and a weapon once forged must always be ready. Deep in the archives of the Elari, a new entry was added to the Galactic Codex. It did not describe humans as primitive or young anymore. The entry was simple, a warning to any who would threaten the Concordat in the future. It read, "Beware the quiet ones, beware the ones without claws, for they build their own. And above all, do not wake the Terrans, for they sleep with one eye open, and their dreams are made of fire." As the generations passed, the story of the tenebrous entity became a legend, a myth told to frighten hatchlings. But in the naval academies of the Republic, the footage of the battle was required viewing. Not for glory, but for a reminder. A reminder that physics is the ultimate arbiter, that kindness is a luxury bought with ammunition, and that in a universe of indifference, the only thing that matters is having the biggest rock and the will to throw it. The dangerous ships drifted in the dark of the Uit clouds, silent sentinels, their crews waiting in cryosleep, eternally vigilant, eternally dangerous, the guardians of a galaxy that would never again tremble before a monster because it had befriended the beast. The silence of space was no longer empty. It was heavy with the presence of humanity, a presence that said, clearly and without hesitation, "We are here. We are waiting. Try us." This was the legacy of the Terran intervention, not of conquest, but of a terrifying, absolute protection. And far away in the dark voids between galaxies, the tendrils of other horrors recoiled, sensing the vibration of the kinetic wall, sensing the presence of the apex predator, and deciding, for the first time in eons, to turn around and find easier prey. The humans had not just won a battle, they had changed the food chain of the universe. They had proven that even in the face of eldritch abominations, a sufficiently accelerated piece of metal is indistinguishable from divine intervention. The Grand Chamber of the High Synod, once a place of fear, was now a hall of strategy. A massive statue had been erected in the center, replacing the holographic projector. It was not of an Elari nor a Valeri. It was a crude, brutal depiction of a kinetic slug, a monolith of iron. Engraved upon its base in the languages of all 300 species was the human motto that had saved them all, ADASDRA per ASPERA, to the stars through difficulty. And below that, in smaller, jagged letters scrawled by a Marine on the hull of the Kali after the battle, "Peace through superior firepower." The story of the rare monster and the dangerous ships was over, but the story of the human galaxy had just begun. And it was a story written in the stars with ink made of starlight and gunpowder, a testament to the enduring, terrifying, and magnificent spirit of the species that refused to die. The galaxy breathed a sigh of relief, but it held its breath whenever a human ship passed, off. Ring a silent prayer of thanks to the monsters who kept the dark at bay. The end was not an end, but a standing watch, a vigilance that would last until the heat death of the universe. For as long as there were shadows, there would be humans standing in the light, casting a shadow of their own, a shadow shaped like a gun, pointing into the deep, daring the nightmares to come back. And the nightmares, having learned fear, stayed away. Thus the aliens trembled no more, for they stood on the shoulders of giants, and those giants wore combat boots and carried railguns. The universe was vast, dark, and full of terrors, but the humans were the most dangerous thing in it. And that was, finally, a good thing. The High Counselor Vikor, now extremely old, would often sit by the window of his spire looking at the stars. His grandchildren would ask him about the dark times, about the monster that ate stars. He would smile, his mandibles clicking softly. "Yes," he would say, "it was a terrible monster, but then the humans came, and they brought their ships, and the monster learned that it was not the hunter." "What are humans, grandfather?" the young ones would ask. Vikor would pause, watching a Terran patrol cruiser streak across the night sky, its engines burning with a fierce, defiant light. "Humans," he would answer, "are the ones who look at the impossible and say no. They are the ones who bring thunder to a silent void. They are our friends, and because of that, we are safe." The young ones would go to sleep, dreaming of heroes made of soft flesh and iron will, while the patrol cruiser drifted into the dark, its sensors sweeping, its railguns charged, ready to prove the old alien right, again and again forever. The silence of the cosmos was deep, but it was no longer lonely. It was filled with the heartbeat of the Alliance, a rhythm set by the thrumming engines of the Terran fleet. And in that rhythm there was a promise: you are not alone. You are not defenseless. We are the shield and the sword. We are humanity. And the stars shined on, unconsumed, protected by the dangerous ships and the terrifying, wonderful monsters who built them. In the deepest archives of the UNS Kali, kept in a physical safe that required 2 keys to open, lay the captain's log from that fateful day. The final entry was not a tactical report nor a casualty list. It was a personal note from Admiral Harper, written in hand. It read simply, "They looked at us like we were gods. We're just the garbage men, but someone has to take out the trash." And so the garbage men of the galaxy stood their post, and the universe remained clean. The rare monster was a footnote in history, a cautionary tale for any other cosmic horrors that might be watching. The message was clear: the Milky Way is closed, the humans are home, and they are armed. The atmospheric scrubbers of the High Synod cycled the air, removing the last traces of ozone from the weapon discharge simulations, but the scent of change remained. The galaxy had grown up. It had lost its innocence but gained its survival. It was a fair trade. And as the lights dimmed in the Great Hall, the statue of the kinetic slug seemed to glow in the twilight, a silent guardian watching over the sleeping diplomats, a promise of violence in service of peace, an enduring symbol of the HFY. Humanity, forever yours, the guardians of the night.